Oh,
on the
I already
phone?
hit live stream. We're
Okay.
going in. Sorry
All right.
about that. We can talk about it more in the
Yep.
after show. My bad. So, okay, here we go. We are into section 5 of 8 of the year one philosophy backbone course, where we are going slowly through one essay at a time, cherry picking things, and looking at 8 major fields in philosophy that are still alive and interesting. We did a two-parter for the intro to this section, which is on a priori knowledge. So now we're going to get to read our first essay on the nature of a priori knowledge. And of course, we get good old Plato again, who we've looked at some dialogues of. Pretty soon on Monday, we're going to be starting recordings for all of Plato's dialogues, which is going to be fun too. Let's look and see if they did a better job with this excerpt than the other book did with theirs. And how will you inquire, Socrates, into that which you do not know? All right. So one of the things, so with the Socratic method, there was this idea of a commitment to not knowing. And I know that we've done our interpretation of all of this, which is sort of understands the fact that the Greeks had to invent the word irony to deal with Socrates. But there's a more traditional philosophy curriculum, academic interpretation of it, which is that the distinction between Socrates and Plato is that Socrates really does end all of his dialogues in a state of perplexity for both himself and any honest interlocutor that he's dialoguing with. So he starts out with, I want a definition. I want something that tells me exactly what piety is, for instance, and it applies to all pious instances and all pious actions and all pious people, and it applies to nothing that is impious. I want that kind of knowledge. And then, through the course of the dialogue, it's clear that he doesn't have it, and the person he's discussing this topic with doesn't have it either. And so he ends in a state of perplexity, and that's the end of it. Now, I think there's a richer interpretation than that, but if we just stop right there and say, okay, well, Plato's not content with that. So Plato, who's giving us these dialogues of Socrates, after about the first third and halfway through the second third, he wants to start giving his answers to things. And so the idea is that it's really Plato's notion. Again, this doesn't go along with the other things we've talked about, but it's basically Plato's notion, this idea of recollection. And so the challenge to the skeptical perspective is like, okay, Socrates, you want to say that you don't know anything. You don't know anything about this thing that you want to know more about. But you want to inquire about it and you want to have a conversation about it. Well, how are you going to know if you're getting closer to the thing or further away from the thing if you don't have any idea what the thing is to begin with? You must have some sort of a notion of what this thing is. And now you're just getting your thoughts clear on it. So the traditional teaching is that, again, that we're not endorsing it or disagreeing with it. We're just putting it out there right now. And we're going to say the traditional explanation is that Plato comes up with this knowledge as recollection. Let me see if I can turn this light on and make reading a little easier. There we go. My bad. There we go. Come on, turn on. Beautiful. Okay. So he comes up with this idea of recollection as a way of getting out of that skeptical pit. So, how will you inquire, Socrates, into that which you do not know? There it is. What will you put forth as the subject of inquiry? And if you find what you want, how will you ever know that this is the thing which you did not know? Socrates says, I know, Meno, what you mean. But just see what a tiresome dispute you are introducing. You argue that a man cannot inquire either about that which he knows, nor about that which he does not know. For if he knows, he has no need to inquire, and if not, he cannot. For he does not know the very subject about which he is to inquire, right? That's the challenge. Well, Socrates, and is not the argument sound? I think not, says Socrates. Why not? I will tell you why. I have heard from certain wise men and women who spoke of things divine that, what did they say? Well, they spoke of a glorious truth as I conceive. What was it, and who were they? Some of them were priests and priestesses who had studied how they might be able to give a reason for their profession. We've been talking in our other class about the conversation between philosophy and theology, right? And he's saying, well, I was listening to people trying to make good arguments in this other realm of theology and religion, and they had an interesting notion. There have been some poets who also spoke of these things by inspiration, like Pindar and many others who were inspired. And they say, mark now and see whether their words are true. They say that the soul of a man is immortal and at one time has an end, which is termed dying, and at another time is born again, but is never destroyed. And the moral is that a man ought to live always in perfect holiness. Quote, for in the ninth year, Persephone sends the souls of those from whom she has received the penalty of ancient crime back again from beneath into the light of the sun above. And these are they who become noble kings and mighty men and great in wisdom and are called saintly heroes in after ages. The soul, then, as being immortal and having been born again many times and having seen all things that exist, whether in this world or in the world below, has knowledge of them all. And it is no wonder that she should be able to call to remembrance all that she ever knew about virtue and about everything. For as all nature is akin and the soul has learned all things, there is no difficulty in her eliciting, or as men say, learning, out of a single recollection all the rest. If a man is strenuous and does not faint, for all inquiry and all learning is but recollection. And therefore, we ought not to listen to this sophistical argument about the impossibility of inquiry, for it will make us idle and is sweet only to the sluggard. But the other saying will make us active and inquisitive. In that confiding, I will gladly inquire with you into the nature of virtue. Okay. So he's giving his answer out of the skeptical pit, and he's saying, that's if you want to be lazy, you might like that argument. But we remember because we read Ion and we talked about his idea of inspiration, but we also remember he made this argument about sameness, and I really should stop bringing it up until we look at the text again because it's a maddeningly confusing text when you first read it. But the notion was it's not just the nature of virtue or high minded things, but it's pretty much Socrates is identifying that because of the Humean problem of all of our experiences being varied and changing and shadow-like and perception-based and all of that other stuff, we shouldn't have notions of sameness. We shouldn't have there's something that we're bringing to the story of trying to inquire about things. We can use these ideas of number and equality and greatness and lesserness and all of these things, but it's not clear why we should be able to do that. If you posit that a man is just sort of born into the earth as a limited creature amongst other varied forms, he never actually encounters anything that's the same. He never actually so how is it that he knows these two things are more like the same than these other two things unless he knows what the same is? And so this is sort of foundational for the whole Socratic and the Platonic attitude for understanding. Uh, it's not like postmodernists had to come along to create this problem, right? We talked about the idea of philosophy as being like a tent with 127 great thinkers. We read some small excerpts from Aquinas, and it's like, oh my God, he's got analytical and synthetic and a priori, and he's got all of these notions. He didn't have to wait around for Kant. And the same with Socrates, right? These guys, they have the same ideas that they're engaging with, and they're all responding to each other over time. It's one way of looking at it. Um, but the idea here for Socrates is that, it should seem like a miracle to us that we're able to make sense of a world, right? For Hume, it would be, right? Hume is honest enough to say, I don't even think I exist. I don't know anything except that there's perceptions, and when they're not happening, I don't see an eye that's waiting for something to happen to it. I never perceive it directly. All I have are these perceptions and series of perceptions. And he gets to a real crisis. And then he even looks back at his arguments. He says, I get that this doesn't even make sense. It's not that I don't like the conclusion. I'm bravely embracing the conclusion, but even the arguments that they're the case don't even hold up because I'm relying on ideas that I shouldn't have access to. And Socrates understood all that, and he's saying, "Yeah, I noticed. I noticed we're relying on ideas that we shouldn't have access to." And so this story, this myth, is that well, when you die, the way he puts it is, there are things that are opposites. Being asleep and being awake are opposites, and there's a process of falling asleep, and there's a process of waking up. And he looks at the categories of things that are like that, and he says, "Well, death and birth are like that." And essentially the myth is that when you die you're reunited with the oneness of the forms or the absolutes or however you want to put it, but you understand those things because you're connected to them intimately, relationally, as Socrates puts it. And then in one passage, and then when you're born again, you're born into a new body. You have all of the limitations that make it possible to have a particular life, a specific kind of a life. And so for Socrates, the point of philosophy is to do ethics and to orient your soul properly so that you are able to navigate towards justice, that you won't be deceived in that afterlife by having your body nailed through pleasure and pain, or your soul rather nailed through pleasure and pain to the body and be distracted into thinking that's what's most real. And you'll be able to come back again as much enlightened as possible because you understand best, or something like that. We haven't fleshed it out. It's not clear how to, but in any case, that's what he's talking about. So now, remember, in this section, we're going to look at a priori. We're going to look at knowledge that you can have before experience, and we're going to look at whether or not it's just analytical, and whether or not the analytical is just, um, uh, God, I hate getting old and forgetting words. What's the word? I want to say palindromatic, which is completely not the right word. Whether or not analytical is just not cliche. What's the word? Shoot, I'll remember it. I'm so sorry. Um, so we're going to look at the nature of this type of knowledge, but for Socrates, this type of knowledge is foundationally important for understanding anything else, and that he identifies that we're relying upon it without realizing that we are, and then he's getting insights. He thinks so. There's synthetic truths. There's a world that can be perceived and studied and understood to whatever degree it can because of this a priori knowledge. This knowledge is not just reducible to the use of the terms and the definitions of the words. Okay. Minos says, yes, Socrates, but what do you mean by saying that we do not learn and that what we call learning is only a process of recollection? Can you teach me how this is? We read this in the longer version, and it's quite a fun translation about, well, just the gentle relationship between Socrates and Meno. I told you, Meno, just now that you are a rogue, and now you ask whether I can teach you, when I am saying that there is no teaching, but only recollection, and thus you imagine that you will involve me in a contradiction. Indeed, Socrates, I protest that I had no such intention. I only asked the question from habit. But if you can prove to me that what you say is true, I wish that you would. It will be no easy matter, but I will try to please you to the utmost of my power. Suppose that you call one of your numerous attendants, and I may demonstrate on him. And we know what's coming. This is a great passage, right? Certainly. Come hither, boy. He is Greek and he speaks Greek, does he not? Yes, indeed. He was born in the house. Attend now to the questions which I ask him. Oh, maybe we should do this since we've done this before. We'll pull up a whiteboard so that we can follow along here. Let's go ahead and do that. This should be a one-click thing, StreamYard. But let's see how this goes. Boom, boom, boom. Sign into my account. I'm not signing into an account. Okay, my bad. Whether or not all analytical truths are reducible to tautologies. God. Tautologies, whether or not they're all tautological. For Socrates, they're clearly not. Okay, let's share the whiteboard. Whiteboard share. Here we go. And there it is. This is not the one. All right, perfect. Okay. So he's talking to the slave boy who was born in the house, who understands Greek, but nothing about geometry. Attend now to the questions which I ask him and observe whether he learns from me or only remembers. Okay, so this the point of this demonstration is Socrates going to say anything to the slave boy that's him adding knowledge? And the test is Socrates is going to try to not tell the boy anything, but rather only ask him questions to see if he already knows. I will, says Meno. Tell me, boy, do you know that a figure like this is a square? Well, we're going to draw a horrible approximation of one, but here we go. A figure like this is a square. Ooh, it auto fixed it for us. That's great. I do, says the boy. And you know that a square figure has four lines that are equal to each other, right? Certainly. And these lines, which I have drawn through the middle of the square, are also equal. Oh, I thought it would fix that for me too, but okay. That those two are equal to each other. Yes. A square may be any size, is that correct? Certainly. And if one side of the figure be 2 feet and the other side be of 2 feet, how much will the whole be? I mean, let me explain. If one direction the space was of 2 feet and in the other direction 1 foot, the boy would, or the whole would be of 2 feet taken once, right? So he says, okay, so imagine you've got a square. Oops. Imagine you've got a square. And he says, well, if it's 2 feet by 2 feet, what's the area? He says, let me explain what I mean. If you had one that was 2 feet by 1 feet, that would be two 1 by 1 squares, right? Isn't that correct? And the boy says, yes. But since the side is also 2 feet, then that's twice 2 feet, right? So the area of this one would be 2 squared equals 4, right? You'd have four of these 1 by 1s that fit inside of this. And the boy says, yeah, of course, obviously, Socrates, I understood that. And how many are twice 2 feet? Count, can you tell me? And the boy says, four, Socrates. And might there not be another square twice as large as this and having like this the lines equal? Yes. Okay. So he says, all right. So if we have a square like this one, and we know that its area is 4, forgive the fact that these are not squares. He says, might we not have a square that's exactly twice as large? Something with an area of, say, 8, right? Couldn't there be one like that? And he says, yes. And of how many feet would that be? He says, well, it would be of 8 feet. And now try and tell the length of the line which forms the side of the double square. So he says, what is X, right? If this is 2 and this is 2 and that makes 4, and the square with twice as much size and area would be 8, what is X? That's what he's asking. This one's 2 feet. What will that one be? Well, clearly, Socrates, it will be double. So that's the boy's first answer. He thinks this would be 4. Obviously, we know that's not true, right? Do you observe, Meno, that I am not teaching the boy anything, but only asking him questions? And now he fancies that he knows how long a line is necessary in order to produce a figure of 8 square feet. Does he not? Meno says, yes. And does he really know? Meno says, certainly not. He only guesses that because the square is double, the line will be double too. Meno says, true. Observe him when he recalls the steps in regular order. To the boy, he says, tell me, boy, do you assert that a double space comes from a double line? Remember that I am not speaking of the oblong, but of a figure equal in every way and twice the size of this. That is to say, of 8 feet. And I want to know whether you still say that a double square comes from a double line. And he says, yeah, absolutely. But does not this line become doubled if we add another such line here? Well, certainly. And four such lines will make a space containing 8 feet? Yes. Let us describe such a figure. Would you not say that this is the figure of 8 feet? And he says, yes. And are there not these four divisions in the figure, each of which is equal to the figure of 4 feet? Ooh, true, he says. And is not that 4 times 4? Certainly. And 4 times is not double. 4 times something is not double. Okay, so we can draw this out. We understand what he's doing. So he's saying, okay, so we've got the 2 by 2 square here. And what I'll do is I'll just, I'll double it, but I'll double it in this direction as well over here. Right. And so now I've got one, two, three, four of the things that we said were fours. So that would be, four times whatever the area of this first one was. But four times is not the same as two times, right? It doesn't equal two times. So that's what he's just proved to the boy. No, indeed. Well, how much is it then? Well, it's four times. Therefore, the double line boy has given a space not twice, but four times as much. Isn't that right? He says, true. Four times four are 16, are they not? Yes. What line would give you a space of 8 feet, as this gives one of 16? Do you see? Yes, I get the question now, the boy says. And the space of 4 feet is made from this half line. Right. All right. So he's saying, look, if you're telling me that this one is 16, because each of these were fours, and you know that if I were to take this line here and cut it in half, I would have an area of four because you're the one that set this all up. How the heck are we going to get something with an area of eight? And the space, yeah, good, good. And is not a space of 8 feet twice the size of this and half the size of the other? Yeah, yeah. That's right, he says, right? If over here I've got four and over here I've got 16, then I need something in the middle. The one I'm looking for is in the middle between those two. But, this has line X over here and this has line 2X over here. I need something between one and two times. Such a space then will be made out of a line greater than this one and less than the other one, right? Yeah, I think so, says the boy. Very good. I like to hear you say what you think. And now tell me, is not this a line of 2 feet and that a line of four? Yes. Then the line which forms the side of 8 feet ought to be more than this line of 2 feet and less than this line of 4 feet. Right? Okay, so you're saying, right, this one was two and this one was four. So X is going to be greater than two and less than four. Isn't that right? And the boy says, yes. Right? He's following the thought process, but every single time Socrates isn't defining it. He isn't saying, you know, the doubling the side will give you quadruple the area. He's saying, well, let's draw it out. Tell me what you think. Do you think that this is, two times or four times? He goes, no, it's four times. Okay. All right. Then the line which forms the side of 8 feet ought to be more. Yes, it ought to. Try and see if you can tell me how much that will be. And the boy guesses his second answer. So his second answer is three, right? Not three factorial, but three. So three is between two and four. So, I first I guessed it was four, but it's got to be bigger than two and less than four. So I'm going to guess three. Okay. So if we add a half to this line of two, that will be the line of three, right? So, okay. So he cuts this one in half. By the way, having a compass and a straight edge is really fun. If anybody knows about an online whiteboard that lets you have a compass and a straight edge, that would be a really fun thing to do. So he just cuts one of these twos in half to make it a one, and he says, "Well, this is a two and this is a one. So here's your length of three, and I could do the same thing up here. So this is now the size that you're talking about, right?" But if there are 3 feet this way and 3 feet that way, the whole space will be 3 times 3 feet. Yeah, that's evidence, says the boy. How much is 3 times 3, says Socrates. 9, says the boy. And how much is twice 4? Well, that's 8. Ah, then the figure of 8 is not made out of the line of 3, is it? No, says the boy, it's not, right? He's just asking him to think it out and not faint, as he says earlier, not assume the answer or give up or be frustrated. So now he knows he's getting closer to the answer, right? 2 is less than x, which has to be less than 3 because 3 squared, he just discovered, gives you 9. And so that's too large, right? That's larger than what we're looking for. Okay. Here we go. But from what line? Tell me exactly. And if you would rather not reckon, try and show me the line. Indeed, Socrates, I do not know, says the boy. Oh, that's cool. He gave him the chance to be really quite clever and genius there. He's drawn the line already, right? Okay. Do you see, Meno, what advances he has made in his powers of recollection? He did not know at first, and he does not know now. What is the side of a figure of 8 feet? But then he thought he knew, and answered confidently as if he knew, and had no difficulty. Now he has a difficulty and neither knows nor fancies that he knows. Okay, this is a really fun definition from Socrates. An educated man is a man who has some idea of how little he knows, right? We won't go into the whole story again, but famously, Socrates was called the wisest man of Athens by the oracle at Delphi in the Apollo's temple. And he said, "I know that's not true because I know I don't know anything." So he set out on his mission to have all these conversations to say, somebody must know something that I don't know because I don't know anything. And he was trying to find anybody who knew anything. And he concluded at the end of all these conversations that he did know one thing that nobody else knew. He was the only person who was aware that he didn't know anything. Everybody else thought they knew a whole bunch of things. But here he is pointing out to the boy that, or to Mino. And of course, the actual context of the dialogue is so much more fun because Mino is genuinely doing the same thing. Earlier in the dialogue, he's giving bold answers and then realizing he doesn't know. And instead of being offended like Euthyphro or like the other two who come into the story, Anytus, who ends up, killing Socrates through lawfare, he instead of being upset about the fact that he's been exposed as not knowing, he says, "Socrates, teach me this other way of thinking. It seems like there's wisdom there, and I don't know how to get there." But all right, so he turns to Meno and he's saying, "Yeah, just like you a second ago. You thought you knew things, and now you realize you don't. That's a lot of progress. You know something you didn't know before. You used to have two wrong ideas. One, the wrong idea, and two, that it was the right idea. Now you know that it isn't the right idea. That's making progress." Okay. True, says Meno. Is he not better off in knowing his ignorance? I think that he is, says Meno. If we have made him doubt and given him the torpedo's shock, have we done him any harm? I think not, says Meno. We have certainly, as would seem, assisted him in some degree to the discovery of the truth. And now he will wish to remedy his ignorance. But then he would have been ready to tell the world again and again that the double space would have been the double side. True, says Meno. But do you suppose that he would ever have inquired into or learned what he fancied that he knew, though he was really ignorant of it, until he had fallen into perplexity under the idea that he did not know and had desired to know? I think not, says Socrates. Now, this is an interesting psychological insight from Socrates. And I think it's important to remember. There are those of us who have had the entire world of our ideas fall apart on us. That's a great place to be. It's much better than going through life without that distraught, perplexed. I mean, it's horrible. It feels horrible, right? And people resist it and they try to double down and they try to lie to themselves or quickly grab onto anything else. But the people who have fallen through the ice, so to speak, into the chaos and realize that, everybody around them has been pretending since the time they were an infant that they knew all sorts of things. And so they felt this psychological urge to also pretend to know things that they didn't know. And they've been pushed into it, and everybody's giving bold and confident answers. "Oh, I know, I can repeat it. You'll applaud me if I say this." And uh, none of that's thinking. All of that's still slavish. It's all controlled, and none of it's the liberated mind. And then Socrates says, you kind of have to have this intellectual catastrophe happen to you because he's saying, as long as that's working, you'd be a rare kind of a wise person who would stop and actually criticize yourself and ask questions. You kind of need the shipwreck. You need to slam your head into the wall in order to say, okay, maybe I need to sit down and realize I don't know so much as I think I do, and maybe try to work it out. But Socrates says, don't you agree, Meno? That's a better place to be, right? I mean, you got a hope now. You've got a chance. You weren't even looking for the truth before. You were gleefully pretending to yourself and others that you had it, and you didn't even know that you were lying. I mean, you're just lost. Now we're in a good place. So Socrates likes that feeling of I have no idea, but I used to think I knew. And well, we won't have to talk about that anymore. But again, like he says, he isn't unaware of the enmity he's engendering in others. He understands that people like to set themselves up as the great knower or the one to follow. And also there's a reason for that, which is 99% of people are looking for someone to follow. Say, this is the guy I'm following. This is the person who I repeat what he says. And they watch Fox News or they watch CNN and they whatever it is, anything to be fed the answer rather than to be in that horrible state of, oh geez, I haven't got a clue. But for Socrates, that's the best place because then you can say, okay, now I can start. Now I can start actually thinking and being honest and seeing where it leads. And yeah, it's traumatic and it's terrifying and it's disorienting. But you'd agree, Mino, that's a better place to be than gleefully thinking, you know a lot that you don't really know. And Mino agrees. Okay. Mark now the further development. I shall only ask him and not teach him, and he shall share the inquiry with me. And do you watch and see if you find me telling or explaining him anything instead of eliciting his opinion. Tell me, boy, is not this a square of 4 feet which I have drawn? He goes back to the first square. He says, yes. And I add another square equal to the former one. He says, yes. And a third which is equal to either of them. Yes. Suppose that we fill up the vacant corner. Very good. So he's drawn those 4 times squares again. Here then, there are 4 equal spaces. He says, yes. And how many times larger is this space than the other? And the boy says, 4 times larger. But it ought to have been twice only, as you will remember. True. And does not this line reaching from corner to corner bisect each of these spaces? So let's draw that again. Can we, we'll go down here. Okay. So he draws it again. This will make it a square. I wonder if I can copy paste something like that. Well, we'll do our best to approximate it. All right. So he draws this and he draws this and he draws this and he says, okay, so this is 4 times. That's not what we wanted. But then what if I were to do this and I were to do this? So now I've drawn the diagonals of the larger square. Let's see what happens now. And are there not here 4 equal lines which contain this space? There are. Look and see how much this space is. I do not understand. Has not each interior line cut off half of the 4 spaces? Yes. And how many spaces are there in this section? 4. Okay, so let's do this here. So actually, let's draw this one. We should use a different color. Okay, here we go. So he's going to draw this one, this one, this one, and this one. He says, now take a look at this, right? We've got our original square, right? He says, isn't this our original square? And he says, yeah, that's our original. Oops. That's our original square right there. He goes, okay, and now we've got 4 of them, right? Okay, and what if I cut this one in half with a diagonal? And what if I do all of these with diagonals? Haven't I cut them all in half? Remember, this is 16, this whole big thing here. So if I cut it in half, maybe I've got 8, right? So the square, this orange square, which is made up of the diagonals that bisect the original square, that's the one with twice the area. Well, we're going to get there in a second. See, he's going to do it step by step just by asking questions. Are there not here 4 equal lines which contain this space? There are. Look how much this space is. I do not understand. Well, has each interior line cut off half of the 4 spaces? He goes, yeah, look at that. This cut off half of this square. And this one cut off half of this square over here. And this one cut off half of this square over here. And this one cut off half of this square over here. Isn't that fun? And how many square spaces are there in this section? He says 4. And how many in this? 2. And how many is 4 times 2? He goes twice. And this space is of how many feet? Oh, this here is of 8 feet. Oh, shiza. And from what line do you get this figure? The boy says, from this. He points at it. He goes, this one. This is the line. I found the line that gives you twice the area of the original square. You start with a square and you go like this. If you make a square out of that, you've got, oh, wow. Thank you for the auto fix. There you go. You've got the square that's twice as large. You could just redraw it over here and you've got it. Isn't that fun? Okay. But that's the square whose diagonal is so. The relationship, of course, between these is 2 times the square root of 2, which we have Pythagoras, but we'll get to it. All right. So the boy has the answer now on try number 3. That's pretty good. How many spaces are in this section? This that is from the line which extends from corner to corner of the figure of 4 feet. He goes, yes, and that is the line which the learned call the diagonal. So he's just telling him the name, right? So he has taught him the name of the diagonal, but that doesn't matter because the boy already had the answer. You could call it Fred. We call the line that goes across a square, we'll call it Fred. But he says, hey, I'll teach you something. They call it the diagonal. All right. But it doesn't matter. The boy already pointed at it. He said, what's the line that gives me the square with twice the area? The boy jumped up and pointed with his finger. Ah, that's the line. That's the one that'll do it. And if this is the proper name, then you, Minos slave, are prepared to affirm that the double space is the square of the diagonal. Certainly, Socrates. Imagine how happy he must have been. He was perplexed a moment ago, having given 2 wrong answers. What do you say of him, Meno? Were not all the answers given out of his own head? Yes, they were all his own. And yet, as you were just now saying, he did not know. True, says Meno. But still, he had in him those notions of his, had he not? Yes. Then he who does not know may still have true notions of that which he does not know? Yeah, says Meno. And at present, these notions have just been stirred up in him, as in a dream. But if he were frequently asked the same questions, if different in different forms, he would know as well as anyone at last, right? I dare say, right? Essentially, he knows everything about geometry. He just doesn't know it yet, or doesn't know that he knows it. He needs to recollect it. He needs to think through all of the careful processes without fainting, as Socrates says. But going, and he can have a teacher who can help guide him through it, but the teacher's not telling him anything. The teacher's revealing to him what he knows about the connections of the notions already. Without anyone teaching him, he will discover his knowledge for himself if he is only asked questions. So this is Socrates justifying his method. Yes, says Meno. And this spontaneous recovery of knowledge in him is recollection, right? True, says Meno. Now he's doing the exact same thing with Meno now that he just did with the slave boy while he's doing it, right? He's asking the exact same types of questions he always asks. He goes, and spontaneous recovery of knowledge, we call that recollection, right? Yes, we do, right? So it's like he's the boy doing the geometry at the same time, which is, of course, it's a very, very beautiful dialogue with, this is just one little piece of it that mirrors the whole thing. But all right. And this knowledge which he now has, must he not either have acquired or always possessed it? Yes. But if he always possessed this knowledge, he would always have known. Or if he has acquired the knowledge, he could not have acquired it in this life unless he had been taught geometry, for he may be made to do the same with all geometry and every other branch of knowledge. Now, anyone ever taught him all of this? You must know about him if, as you say, he was born and bred in your house. And I am certain that no one ever did teach him any of this stuff. And yet he has the knowledge. The fact, Socrates, is undeniable. But if he did not acquire the knowledge in this life, then he must have had and learned it in some other time. Clearly he must, says Meno, which must have been the time when he was not a man. Yes. And if there have been always true thoughts in him, both at the time when he was and was not a man, which only need to be awakened into knowledge by putting questions to him, his soul must have always possessed this knowledge. For he either for he always either was it always either was or he always either was or was not a man. Obviously, says Meno. And if the truth of all things always existed in the soul, then the soul is immortal. Wherefore, be of good cheer and try to recollect what you do not know, or rather, what you do not remember. I feel somehow that I like what you are saying, says Mino. And I, Mino, like what I am saying. Some things I have said of which I am not altogether confident, but that we shall be better and braver and less helpless if we think that we ought to inquire than we should have been if we indulged in the idle fancy that there was no knowing and no use in seeking to know what we do not know. That is a theme upon which I am ready to fight in word and deed to the utmost of my power. We remember the rest of the dialogue because we've read it, you and I, before we started all of this. Um, and it is a very touching. But Socrates says, I'm not sure of a lot of things, but on this one, I'd fight with not only my words, my deeds. And we remember when he was given the option to avoid death, he said to his friends, he says, look, I think it was Credo. He says, look, we've been talking about things that really matter: ethics, virtue, piety, justice. We've had great conversations about those things. If I leave and I run away and I refuse to take the cup that's been given to me here, every word I ever said means nothing. It means the opposite of what I said. It means it was a useful way of passing the time and impressing a few people and surviving, but I'd gladly betray it all just for a few more years of miserable life. Fuck that. Give me the cup. I'm thirsty. I'm thirsty right now. And so when he says I'll fight word and deed, well, it's Socrates talking. So all right, we're gonna end this. That was a nice short passage. We're going to have a nice long conversation, I imagine, about the nature of a priori and also Plato and Socrates and this idea in the after show. But before we do, is there anything you'd like to say about what we just read and this new section that we just started on the a priori?
What's the name of that passage?
So this had to be from the Meno, right?
Okay, yeah.
We did.
So,
We should read it again. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say if somebody hasn't read it completely, I would suggest that
Mm.
they do.
Yeah, so Elena was talking about doing all of Plato's dialogues. I think we might start that on Monday at some point, and that'll be really, really fun. We've done a lot of Plato's dialogues before, but we remember. I mean, that was a beautiful. Anytus comes in. I mean, he pisses off Anytus, who leaves, and then goes and makes charges against him, so that he has to drink the hemlock through the exact demonstration, right? Through the whole, hey, Meno comes like, I've got answers. And Socrates is like, I bet you don't. And then Meno goes, I think you're right. I don't. He has honesty. And, unlike Euthyphro, he doesn't get all offended and run away or ashamed. And unlike Anytus, he isn't full of vinegar and anger and rage. And there's a lot of tender beauty between Socrates and Meno in this dialogue. So yeah, it's well worth the reading. All right, so we're gonna end the recording and we're gonna go talk about all this stuff in the after conversation. So that's good. See everybody else later.